Jake Morrison stepped off the transport ship and took his first breath of Verdania Prime air. The oxygen tasted different here, thinner somehow, but his lungs adapted quickly. He had been traveling for 3 weeks to reach this remote research station, and now he stood on an alien world that would be his home for the next month. Kepler research station stretched out before him like a small metal city. The buildings were low and rounded, designed to withstand the fierce storms that swept across this planet twice each season. Everything looked functional rather than beautiful, which suited Jake just fine. He was here to work, not to admire architecture. Dr. Lisa Carter walked toward him across the landing pad. She was a tall woman with graying hair and kind eyes that had seen many years of research in dangerous places. Jake recognized her immediately from the video calls they had shared during his journey. "Welcome to Verdania Prime," she said, extending her hand. "How was the trip?" "Long but worth it," Jake replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I am ready to get started." Lisa smiled and gestured toward the main building. "Good, because your teammates are eager to meet you. This is the first time we have had a human join one of our mixed species research teams." As they walked toward the station, Jake noticed movement in the windows above. Shapes that were definitely not human watched his arrival with what seemed like curiosity. He had worked with alien species before, but always in controlled environments on Earth or space stations. This would be his first extended field mission with non-human colleagues. The main building was warmer inside and filled with the quiet hum of life support systems. Lisa led him through corridors lined with research equipment and monitoring stations. Everything was clean and well maintained, exactly what Jake expected from a serious scientific operation. "Your team is in Lab 3, Lisa explained as they walked. 6 researchers from 3 different species, all graduate-level students working on advanced degrees in xenobiology. You will be studying the nocturnal predators we call shadow stalkers." Jake had read about these creatures during his journey. They were large carnivores, roughly the size of earth wolves, that hunted in coordinated packs during the planet's long nights. Previous research teams had struggled to gather meaningful data because the creatures were both intelligent and aggressive. Lisa stopped at a door marked with symbols Jake did not recognize alongside the human letters spelling Lab 3. She pressed her hand to a scanner and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The lab beyond was larger than Jake had expected, with workstations arranged around the edges and a central area filled with holographic displays showing planetary maps and animal tracking data. 6 beings looked up as he entered, and Jake got his first close look at his new teammates. 2 of them were Zentauri, tall creatures that looked like they were made of living crystal. Their bodies caught and reflected the lab's lighting in fascinating patterns. Jake had read that they communicated partly through color changes in their crystalline skin, and he could see subtle shifts in their hue as they observed him. The taller of the 2 Zentauri stepped forward. "I am Zix," she said and carefully pronounced. "English, this is Coral." She gestured to her companion, whose crystal structure seemed to pulse with a warm blue light. "Pleased to meet you both," Jake replied, unsure whether he should offer to shake hands. Zentauri anatomy was quite different from human. The next 2 beings were Florians, humanoid but clearly plant-based. Their skin had a green tint, and what looked like small leaves grew from their shoulders and arms. The larger one had bark-like patches on his face and hands. "I am Bloom," he said in a voice that sounded like wind through trees. "My colleague is Sage." The smaller Florian nodded but did not speak immediately. The last 2 were Aquarians, and Jake could see why they had chosen this planet for research. Verdania Prime had extensive water systems, and these beings needed high humidity to remain comfortable. Their skin was smooth and slightly damp, and gills on their necks opened and closed slowly as they breathed. "Quinn," said the first, pointing to himself. "River," he added, indicating his companion. Jake introduced himself to each of them, noting how they all seemed somewhat nervous around him. He had experienced this before when meeting new alien species. Humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy as being unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. Lisa cleared her throat. Jake will be joining your expedition into the Shadowlands tomorrow. I trust you will all work well together. Zix's crystal skin shifted to a deeper blue. Dr. Carter, we have been discussing the sleeping arrangements. How does Jake plan to survive? The nights in Shadow Stalker territory? Jake looked confused. The same way I survive nights anywhere else, I suppose. I brought a good sleeping bag and a basic tent. The silence that followed his words was uncomfortable. All 6 alien researchers exchanged glances that clearly communicated concern. Perhaps you do not understand, Coral said slowly. The Shadow Stalkers hunt at night. They are intelligent pack hunters with excellent night vision and sharp teeth. Most research teams use energy barriers and maintain constant vigilance to survive. We take turns staying awake, Bloom added. Usually 2 researchers on watch at all times. Jake nodded thoughtfully. I understand they are dangerous. But I have camped in dangerous areas before. Bears, wolves, big cats. You learn to take precautions. What kind of precautions? Sage asked, speaking for the first time. Her voice was soft and musical. Simple things, Jake said. Choose your campsite carefully. Set up basic alarms and barriers. Know the animals you are dealing with. Most predators are actually quite predictable once you understand their behavior. Quinn's gills fluttered rapidly, which Jake had read was a sign of anxiety in Aquarians. You speak of sleeping peacefully among deadly hunters. This seems unwise. Not peacefully exactly, Jake corrected. But humans have been sleeping in dangerous places for thousands of years. We developed techniques that work, River leaned forward. What techniques? Jake realized this was the perfect opportunity to start building trust with his new teammates. Well, for example, predators usually avoid areas that smell like humans if they have learned to associate us with danger. And most hunting animals follow predictable patterns. If you understand those patterns, you can predict where they will go and how they will behave. The alien researchers looked skeptical but interested. Jake could see that his confidence puzzled them. In their experience, surviving a night with dangerous predators required advanced technology and constant alertness. Tomorrow night you will. See, Jake said with a smile. I brought some basic equipment that should keep us all safe. Simple things, but effective. Dr. Carter watched the exchange with interest. She had worked with many different species over the years, and she recognized the beginning of what could be either excellent cooperation or serious conflict. The alien students clearly viewed Jake's casual attitude toward danger as either ignorance or bravado. You will have tomorrow to prepare, she said. The weather forecast shows clear skies for the next week, which should be perfect for your research. As the meeting ended and the team began discussing logistics for their expedition, Jake noticed that his alien colleagues kept glancing at him with expressions he could not quite read. They seemed torn between professional curiosity and genuine concern for his safety. He looked forward to showing them that human survival techniques, developed over millions of years of evolution, were neither primitive nor ineffective. Sometimes the simplest solutions were also the best ones. The expedition team reached the research site just as Verdania Prime's sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Jake looked around the valley they had chosen for their base camp and nodded with approval. The location offered good visibility in all directions while providing natural windbreaks from the rocky outcroppings that dotted the landscape. His alien teammates immediately began unloading equipment that Jake had never seen before. Zix and Coral worked together to assemble what looked like a portable force field generator, its crystalline components humming with energy as they connected each piece. The device stood nearly 3 meters tall when completed and cast a faint blue glow over their campsite. Bloom and Sage were setting up motion sensors around the perimeter, small devices that would detect any movement within 50 meters of their position. Jake watched as they calibrated each sensor to ignore wind-blown vegetation while remaining sensitive to larger moving objects. Quinn and River had brought portable illumination systems that could turn night into day within a 100-meter radius. The devices looked like small suns when activated, casting harsh white light that would surely be visible from orbit. Jake pulled his equipment from his pack and began setting up his tent. It was a simple design, lightweight fabric stretched over flexible poles, the kind of shelter humans had been using for centuries. Compared to the advanced technology his teammates were deploying, it looked almost primitive. "Jake," Zix called out, her crystal skin shifting to concerned purple hues. "Where is your defensive equipment?" "This is it," Jake replied, gesturing to his tent and the small collection of items beside it. The alien researchers gathered around to examine Jake's gear with obvious puzzlement. They saw coils of rope, several metal stakes, a few small bells, and what appeared to be carefully shaped pieces of wood and wire. "These are your defenses against shadow stalkers?" Coral asked, her crystalline features reflecting confusion. "Part of them," Jake said. He picked up one of the rope coils and began walking around the campsite. "The real defense is understanding how these animals think and behave." As he spoke, Jake began setting up a series of simple snares around their perimeter. He chose locations carefully, placing each trap where natural animal paths would funnel the shadow stalkers into predictable routes. The snares were not designed to harm the creatures, but rather to capture them or at least slow their approach enough to provide early warning. "You see," Jake explained as he worked, "predators like shadow stalkers are intelligent, but they are also creatures of habit. They follow scent trails, use familiar paths, and test defenses in predictable ways." Bloom watched Jake tie complex knots with practiced efficiency. "But what if they simply avoid your traps?" "Then they avoid our camp," Jake replied, "which is exactly what we want." As darkness fell across Verdania Prime, the difference between human and alien approaches to survival became stark. The alien defensive systems activated with brilliant flashes of light and electronic humming. Force fields created shimmering barriers that would stop a charging vehicle. Motion sensors swept the area with invisible beams. Illumination systems turned their campsite into a beacon visible for kilometers. Jake finished setting his snares and returned to his tent. He pulled out a sleeping bag that looked no different from camping gear used by Earth hikers for generations. His teammates watched in amazement as he prepared to sleep without any electronic monitoring or energy barriers. "You cannot be serious," Quinn said, his gills fluttering with anxiety. "You plan to sleep unprotected while shadow stalkers hunt nearby?" "I am protected," Jake assured him. "Just differently than you." Zix assigned watch schedules to her team. 2 researchers would remain awake at all times, monitoring their defensive systems and watching for threats. The others would take shifts throughout the night, ensuring constant vigilance until dawn. Jake crawled into his tent and sealed the entrance. Within minutes, the sounds of his slow, steady breathing indicated that he had fallen asleep. The alien researchers looked at each other with expressions of disbelief. How could any intelligent being sleep peacefully in such a dangerous situation? They wondered if humans were simply too primitive to understand the risks they faced, or if Jake was demonstrating bravery that bordered on insanity. Around midnight, the shadow stalkers arrived. The first sign was a subtle change in the motion sensor readings. Sage, who was on watch duty with River, noticed small movements at the edge of their detection range. The creatures were approaching slowly, testing the area before committing to any direct action. "Contact," Sage whispered into her communicator. "Multiple targets approaching from the northwest." The other team members woke immediately and took positions around their defensive perimeter. Everyone except Jake, who continued sleeping soundly in his simple tent. The shadow stalkers emerged from the darkness like living shadows. They were larger than Jake had expected, easily the size of Earth's biggest wolves, with sleek black fur that seemed to absorb light. Their eyes reflected the brilliant illumination from the alien defense systems, creating an eerie constellation of green dots circling the camp. The creatures moved with obvious intelligence, probing the force field barriers with careful touches of their paws. When the energy fields repelled them, they backed away and tried different approaches. They tested the motion sensors by sending one individual forward while the rest waited to see what would happen. "Fascinating behavior," Coral whispered, recording everything on her portable scanner. "They are definitely more intelligent than our briefings indicated." The Shadow Stalkers seemed frustrated by the alien defenses but not deterred. They began a systematic assault on the energy barriers, testing for weak points with increasing boldness. The force field generators hummed louder as they worked to repel the attacks. What puzzled the alien researchers was how the Shadow Stalkers seemed to completely ignore Jake's area of the camp. The creatures circled the force fields and tested the illuminated perimeter, but they gave Jake's simple tent a wide berth. "Why do they avoid the human?" Quinn asked quietly. Bloom had been watching the Shadow Stalkers' movement patterns carefully. "Notice how they step around something we cannot see. There must be obstacles in their path." As if to prove his point, one of the Shadow Stalkers suddenly yelped and found itself tangled in rope. The creature thrashed briefly before the snare released it unharmed, but the experience made the entire pack more cautious about approaching Jake's area. Throughout the night, the pattern continued. The Shadow Stalkers maintained pressure on the alien defensive systems while avoiding the human section of camp entirely. Their attacks were persistent but not random. They seemed to be learning how the force fields worked, testing different angles and intensities of assault. By 3 in the morning, the alien defense systems were showing signs of strain. The force field generators were running hot, and the illumination systems were drawing heavily on their power reserves. The motion sensors had detected so much activity that they were generating constant alerts. Jake slept through it all. Another Shadow Stalker triggered one of Jake's snares. This time a different design that made a loud clattering noise as metal pieces struck together. The sound sent the entire pack retreating into the darkness for nearly an hour. "His traps are working," River observed with amazement. "Simple pieces of rope and metal are more effective than our energy barriers." When dawn finally broke across Verdania Prime, the Shadow Stalkers melted back into the wilderness as if they had never been there. The alien researchers were exhausted from their night of constant vigilance, and their defensive systems were nearly depleted of power. Jake emerged from his tent looking refreshed and alert. He walked the perimeter of the camp, checking his snares. With obvious satisfaction, "Good night," he said cheerfully. "I caught 3 of them." The alien researchers stared in disbelief. 3 Shadow Stalkers sat calmly in Jake's rope snares, apparently unharmed but completely immobilized. The creatures that had terrorized the camp all night had been captured by devices that looked like toys compared to alien technology. "How is this possible?" Zix asked, her crystal skin cycling through colors that indicated complete confusion. Jake began releasing the captured Shadow Stalkers, speaking to them in calm, soothing tones as he worked. The creatures seemed almost grateful as they bounded away into the morning light. "Simple," Jake replied. "I use their intelligence against them. Smart predators are also curious predators. They investigate new things in their territory, especially things that smell interesting." He held up a small container. "Human scent lure." These creatures have never encountered humans before, so they were curious about the smell. Curiosity led them into my traps. The alien researchers looked at their sophisticated defensive systems, then at Jake's simple rope snares. They had spent the night fighting against the Shadow Stalkers while Jake had worked with their natural behavior to achieve better results. "Your primitive methods are more advanced than our technology," Coral said slowly. Jake smiled as he coiled his ropes. "Not primitive, just different. Sometimes the best solutions are the ones that work with nature instead of against it." As the team prepared breakfast and began planning their research activities for the day, the alien researchers found themselves looking. The morning sun revealed tracks everywhere around their campsite. Jake knelt beside the clearest set of paw prints and began explaining what the marks told him about the Shadow Stalkers who had visited during the night. "See how deep this print is compared to the others," he said, pointing to a particularly clear impression in the soft earth. "This animal is either larger than the rest or carrying extra weight. Probably the pack leader." His alien teammates gathered around him, their recording devices capturing every word. Zix adjusted her scanner to measure the exact depth and dimensions of the tracks while Coral took detailed photographs from multiple angles. "The spacing between prints tells us about their gait," Jake continued, moving to the next set of tracks. These creatures were walking slowly, testing the area. But over here, he pointed to a different trail, you can see where one of them ran after getting caught in my snare. Bloom carefully examined the difference between the walking and running tracks. The stride length changes dramatically. Do all predators show such variation in their movement patterns? Most do, Jake replied. Animals communicate through their tracks just as much as through sound or scent. An experienced tracker can read an entire story just by studying the ground. Sage had been quietly following one of the trail patterns that led away from camp. Jake, this track pattern circles our entire perimeter. One animal walked completely around our defenses. Jake nodded approvingly. That would be their scout. Smart predators always send one individual to test new situations while the rest of the pack stays back. The scout reports back about dangers and opportunities. Quinn recorded this information carefully. Our briefings never mentioned such complex social behavior. Previous research teams reported simple pack hunting tactics. That's because previous teams were fighting them instead of observing them, Jake explained. When animals feel threatened, they become aggressive and simple. When they feel curious or cautious, their true intelligence shows. Jake began teaching his teammates to read the subtle signs that animals left behind. He showed them how broken twigs indicated the height and direction of passing creatures. Scratches on rocks revealed where the shadow stalkers had marked their territory. Even the way grass was bent told stories about when the animals had passed and how quickly they had been moving. River was particularly fascinated by the scent-marking behavior Jake identified. The Aquarian sense of smell is quite developed, but I never considered using it to track animal behavior patterns. Scent tells you everything, Jake said. Fear, aggression, health, age, even emotional state. Once you learn to read the chemical signals animals leave behind, you understand their world much better. During the day, Jake demonstrated how to identify feeding areas, water sources, and travel routes used by the shadow stalkers. He taught his teammates to think like predators, considering what resources the animals needed and how they would move through the landscape to find them. Predators are efficient, he explained as they walked through a narrow valley that showed signs of regular animal traffic. They follow the same routes repeatedly because those routes work. If you can identify their highways, you can predict where they will be. Bloom was taking detailed notes on everything Jake shared. This knowledge could revolutionize our research methods. We have been trying to force observations instead of letting the animals show us their natural behavior. As the afternoon wore on, Jake began teaching them basic trap construction using only materials they could find in the local environment. He showed them how to weave strong rope from plant fibers, how to create spring mechanisms using bent branches, and how to design triggers that would respond to specific weights and movements. The key is understanding what you want to accomplish, Jake said as he demonstrated a simple snare design. Do you want to capture, deter, or simply detect? Each goal requires different techniques. Coral was amazed by the mechanical principles Jake employed. These devices use leverage and tension in ways our engineering courses never covered. The efficiency is remarkable. Jake smiled as he tested the flexibility of a branch he had chosen for a spring trap. Humans have been building traps for thousands of years. We learned to use physics long before we understood the scientific principles behind it. Sage had been experimenting with fiber weaving under Jake's guidance. This rope is surprisingly strong for something made from local plants. How did humans discover these techniques? Trial and error over many generations, Jake replied. Plus desperation. When your survival depends on catching food or avoiding predators, you become very creative very quickly. As evening approached, Jake began preparing their campsite using the lessons he had shared throughout the day. This time, his alien teammates helped him set up a more sophisticated network of snares and warning systems. We will combine your methods with our technology, Zix announced. Perhaps together we can achieve better results than either approach alone. Jake was pleased to see his teammates embracing new ideas. Good plan. Your sensors can detect things my traps cannot, and my traps can catch things your barriers might miss. They work together to create a hybrid defense system. Motion sensors provided early warning of approaching animals, while Jake's snares created physical barriers at key approach routes. The force field generators were repositioned to protect their equipment rather than the entire perimeter. Conserving power for the long night ahead, Quinn had suggested using the illumination systems in pulses rather than constant bright light. Jake mentioned that predators dislike unpredictable changes. Flickering lights might be more effective than steady ones. Excellent thinking, Jake agreed. Predators feel confident when they can predict their environment. Uncertainty makes them cautious. River had been studying the scent marking patterns Jake had identified earlier. If we place our own scent markers along their travel routes, we might be able to influence their movement patterns. Now you are thinking like a human, Jake said with approval. Use their behavior to accomplish your goals instead of fighting against their instincts. As they finished their preparations, Jake noticed that his teammates seemed much more confident than they had the previous evening. They understood now that survival was not just about superior technology, but about understanding and working with the natural world. Tonight will be different, Bloom predicted. We know what to expect from the shadow stalkers, and we have tools to deal with them effectively. Jake checked his watch and noted that sunset was still an hour away. Before dark, we should discuss watch schedules. With our new setup, we might not need as many people awake at one time. Sage looked surprised. You think it will be safe for some of us to sleep? Safer than last night, Jake assured her. Fear comes from not knowing what to expect. Now we understand these animals better, and we have defenses that work with their behavior instead of against it. Coral's crystal skin shifted to what Jake had learned indicated excitement and curiosity. I am eager to see how the shadow stalkers respond to our improved preparations. They will adapt, Jake warned. Intelligent predators learn from experience. They will try new approaches tonight? Quinn's gills fluttered slightly. How do we prepare for unknown tactics? Jake grinned and patted one of his carefully constructed snares. We stay flexible and keep learning. That is what humans do best. As darkness began to fall across Verdania Prime, the research team settled into their modified campsite with a mixture of confidence and anticipation. They had spent the day learning to see their environment through human eyes, and now they would discover whether that new perspective would help them survive another night with the shadow stalkers. Jake made one final check of his traps and warning systems, then looked at his alien teammates with satisfaction. They were no longer just researchers studying dangerous predators. They were becoming hunters themselves, using intelligence and preparation to turn the tables on creatures that had terrified previous expeditions. Ready for another educational evening, he said as he settled into his sleeping bag. Tomorrow we should have even better data on shadow stalker behavior. The alien researchers took their positions around the improved perimeter, but this time they felt prepared for whatever the night might bring. The storm struck without warning just after midnight on their fifth night in shadow stalker territory. What had been a clear evening with gentle breezes suddenly erupted into howling winds and sheets of rain that hammered their campsite with surprising violence. Jake woke immediately as his tent began shaking in the powerful gusts. He could hear his alien teammates shouting to each other over the roar of wind and rain, their voices filled with concern and confusion. The first casualty was the illumination system. Quinn had been adjusting the pulse settings when a massive gust of wind toppled one of the light poles. Sparks flew as the device hit the ground, and then the entire lighting grid went dark. Emergency backup, Zix called out, but her voice was almost lost in the storm noise. Jake heard the hum of backup power systems activating, but within minutes those too began failing. The electrical storm that accompanied the wind and rain was generating electromagnetic pulses that overwhelmed their sensitive electronic equipment. Force field generators are offline, Coral reported, her crystal skin flickering with distressed orange patterns. Motion sensors down, Sage added from somewhere in the darkness. Communications array is dead, Bloom shouted within 20 minutes of the storm's arrival. Every piece of advanced technology in their camp had either failed completely or was functioning at reduced capacity. The alien researchers found themselves in a situation they had never trained for. Completely dependent on primitive methods for survival. Jake emerged from his tent wearing a waterproof jacket and carrying a simple battery-powered flashlight. The light was dim compared to their previous illumination systems, but it worked perfectly despite the electromagnetic interference. "Everyone gather around," he called out, using the storm's brief lulls to make himself heard. "We need to secure the camp before the Shadow Stalkers realize our defenses are down." His alien teammates struggled toward him through the wind and rain. Their advanced equipment was useless, and they looked genuinely frightened for the first time since Jake had met them. "What do we do?" Zix asked, having to shout to be heard over the storm. "Our defensive systems are completely disabled." Jake was already moving, gathering materials from around their campsite. "We use what we have and what nature provides. This storm will actually help us in some ways." Quinn looked confused. "How can this disaster help us?" "Predators hate storms as much as we do," Jake explained as he began collecting rocks and fallen branches. "They seek shelter and wait for better conditions. But if they do come hunting, the rain will mask our scent and the wind will carry away sounds that might attract them." Jake began constructing barriers and warning systems, using only materials that did not depend on electricity or advanced technology. He showed his teammates how to stack rocks to create windbreaks and funnel potential threats into predictable paths. "Bloom, I need you to help me weave rope from those tough grass fibers we identified yesterday," Jake said. "Sage, gather all the small stones you can find. We are going to make noisemakers." "What should we do?" River asked, gesturing to include Quinn. "Help me dig drainage channels around our tents," Jake replied. "If we flood out, we lose everything." The alien researchers had never worked with such basic materials under such harsh conditions. Their scientific training had prepared them for precise measurements and controlled experiments, not emergency survival in a storm. Jake moved with confidence and purpose, his actions guided by instincts developed over countless generations of human ancestors who had survived similar situations. He knew which materials would hold up in wind and rain, how to create stable structures using only natural resources, and most importantly, how to think clearly under pressure. "The key is working with the storm instead of fighting it," he explained, as they built improvised shelters and barriers. "Use the wind to power your alarms, use the rain to create water obstacles, use the darkness to hide your real defenses." Coral watched Jake construct a complex arrangement of ropes and wooden stakes that would create a network of alarms and barriers around their camp. "These techniques are incredibly sophisticated for such simple materials. Humans have been refining these methods for thousands of years," Jake replied. "Every generation added improvements based on what worked and what failed. As they worked, Jake taught his teammates to think like their ancestors had, using available resources to solve immediate problems. They learned to test materials for strength and durability, to predict how structures would behave in wind and rain, and to create backup plans for every critical system." "If this barrier fails, what happens?" Jake asked as they secured a particularly important defensive position. "The Shadow Stalkers could approach from the north," Sage replied. "So what do we do?" Sage thought for a moment. "Create a secondary barrier further back and set alarms to warn us if the first one is breached." "Exactly," Jake said with approval. "Always have multiple layers of defense." By 3 in the morning, they had transformed their disabled high-tech camp into a fortress built from rocks, rope, wood, and determination. The new defenses might look primitive, but they were specifically designed to function in the storm conditions that had destroyed their advanced equipment. Jake tested each component of their improvised security system, making sure every alarm would work and every barrier would hold. His teammates watched in amazement as he turned their desperate situation into a controllable environment. "How do you remain so calm?" Quinn asked. "We have lost all our primary defensive systems." "Because humans have survived worse situations than this for millions of years," Jake replied. Storms come and go, but basic survival principles never change. As if summoned by his words, the Shadow Stalkers chose that moment to attack. The first sign was a subtle change in the storm's rhythm. Jake noticed it immediately, a pattern in the wind noise that did not match the natural chaos of the weather. "They're coming," he announced quietly. His teammates tensed, reaching instinctively for their disabled electronic sensors and weapons. "Forget your technology," Jake said firmly. "Trust your natural senses and the defenses we built together." The Shadow Stalkers emerged from the storm like ghosts, their black forms barely visible against the rain-soaked darkness. They moved more cautiously than before, clearly disturbed by the unusual weather conditions, but still determined to investigate the strange scents and sounds coming from the research camp. Jake's improvised alarm system worked perfectly. As the first Shadow Stalker triggered a rope barrier, wooden chimes clattered together in a distinctive pattern that identified the exact location of the intrusion. "Northwest approach," Jake called out. "Two animals, moving slowly." More alarms began, sounding as additional Shadow Stalkers tested different routes toward their camp. But instead of the overwhelming electronic noise their previous systems had generated, Jake's natural alarms created distinct sounds that provided specific information about each threat. "They cannot approach without triggering our warnings," Coral observed with growing confidence. "And the barriers funnel them exactly where we want them," Bloom added. The Shadow Stalkers seemed frustrated by the new defensive arrangement. Their previous tactics had been developed to counter energy barriers and bright lights, but these physical obstacles required completely different approaches. Jake watched their behavior carefully, noting how they adapted their hunting strategies to deal with the changed conditions. "They are learning, but slowly. The storm is disrupting their normal coordination." One particularly bold Shadow Stalker managed to penetrate their outer defenses, only to find itself caught in one of Jake's most sophisticated snares. The creature thrashed briefly before the release mechanism activated, allowing it to escape unharmed but thoroughly discouraged. "Your traps work even better in these conditions," River observed. "The rain makes the ropes more flexible and responsive." Jake nodded. "I designed them specifically for this environment." Sometimes you have to adapt your tools to match the situation. The storm continued for 3 more hours, but the Shadow Stalkers gave up their assault after repeated failures to breach the human-designed defenses. By dawn, the worst of the weather had passed, and their electronic equipment was beginning to function again. As morning light revealed the extent of their improvised fortifications, the alien researchers looked at their achievements with pride and amazement. They had survived their most dangerous night using nothing but natural materials and human techniques. "We did it," Sage said quietly. "We survived without any advanced technology." Jake began dismantling some of their emergency barriers, saving the materials for future use. "You did more than survive. You learned to think like humans." Zix's crystal skin shifted to warm golden hues that Jake had learned indicated respect and admiration. "Your species possesses wisdom that cannot be programmed into any computer or built into any machine." "Every species has its own wisdom," Jake replied. "The trick is learning from each other." As they restored their regular equipment and prepared for another day of research, the alien team members looked at their human colleague with new understanding. Jake had not just taught them survival techniques. He had shown them how to find solutions using intelligence, creativity, and the accumulated knowledge of countless generations. The final week of the expedition transformed into something none of them had expected when they first arrived at the research site. What had begun as a standard biological survey had evolved into the most comprehensive study of Shadow Stalker behavior ever conducted, combining the best of both alien technology and human intuition. Jake found himself learning as much from his teammates as they were learning from him. Zix had taught him to use crystalline resonance sensors that could detect heartbeats and breathing patterns from hundreds of meters away. Combined with Jake's knowledge of animal behavior, these devices allowed them to monitor Shadow Stalker health and emotional states without any direct contact. The pack leader shows elevated stress patterns when separated from the group. Zix observed, reading the crystalline display with practiced ease. But individual pack members remain calm when alone. Jake studied the data with interest. That suggests a complex social structure. The leader feels responsible for group safety, while subordinates trust the leader to handle threats. Coral had been working with Jake to develop hybrid tracking methods that combined her advanced scanning technology with his traditional tracking skills. Their joint approach could follow shadow stalker movements with unprecedented accuracy while also revealing behavioral patterns that pure technology had missed. "Look at this movement pattern," Coral said, projecting a three-dimensional map of shadow stalker trails over the past week. They are avoiding areas where Jake placed his scent markers, but they investigate new scent sources with great curiosity. "It confirms what I suspected," Jake replied. "These animals are highly territorial but also intensely curious about new things in their environment. We can use both traits to predict and influence their behavior." Bloom and Sage had become fascinated by Jake's knowledge of plant-based materials and their applications in survival situations. Their own plant-like biology gave them insights into local vegetation that Jake found incredibly valuable. "This root system could provide much stronger rope than the surface plants you have been using," Bloom explained, showing Jake a network of underground fibers. "The tensile strength is remarkable." Jake tested the material with growing excitement. This could revolutionize trap construction, strong enough to hold large animals but flexible enough to release them unharmed. Sage had discovered that certain local plants produced natural adhesives when processed correctly. "Combined with your rope techniques, we could create temporary barriers that would dissolve harmlessly after a few days." "Perfect for research applications," Jake agreed. "We could mark territories or create observation blinds without permanent environmental impact." Quinn and River had proven particularly valuable in understanding the water-based aspects of stalker behavior. Their aquatic background helped them recognize how these land predators used water sources for hunting and territorial marking. "The shadow stalkers drink from 3 specific locations in this valley," River reported, showing Jake detailed water analysis results. "Each location serves a different pack hierarchy." Quinn had identified chemical markers in the water that indicated pack membership and territorial boundaries. They use scent marking in water just as much as on land. The chemicals dissolve and spread downstream, creating information networks throughout their territory. Jake was amazed by this discovery. "That explains some movement patterns I could not understand. They are not just marking territory, they are creating a communication system." Together, the team developed research methods that neither species could have achieved alone. Jake's understanding of predator psychology guided their placement of monitoring equipment, while alien technology provided data quality and precision that traditional methods could never match. Their most significant breakthrough came when they successfully predicted and observed a shadow stalker mating ritual that had never been documented before. By combining Jake's behavioral analysis with alien long-range sensors, they identified the specific conditions that triggered this rare event. "The pack structure changes completely during mating season," Jake observed, watching the shadow stalkers through Xanthari optical enhancement devices. "The normal hierarchy disappears and individual pairs bond temporarily." Coral recorded every detail of the ceremony, her scanners capturing biological and behavioral data that would be invaluable to future researchers. The chemical changes during bonding suggest emotional connections far more complex than simple mating instincts. The alien students had also learned to apply Jake's survival techniques to their own research challenges. When equipment malfunctioned or weather conditions prevented normal data collection, they now had alternative methods that did not depend on technology. "Yesterday's magnetic storm would have ruined our entire day's work," Sage noted as she checked readings from a clever arrangement of plant fibers that Jake had taught her to weave into a natural electromagnetic sensor. "But we collected better data using your organic detection methods." Jake was equally impressed by how quickly his teammates had adapted human techniques to their own species' capabilities. "You have taken basic human knowledge and improved it," beyond anything I could have imagined. Bloom had developed hybrid traps that used both Jake's mechanical principles and Florian plant-growing abilities. These living snares could adjust their size and sensitivity based on approaching animals, creating more humane and effective capture methods. The plants respond to the animal's emotional states, Bloom explained. Aggressive animals trigger stronger restraints, while curious animals encounter gentler barriers that encourage investigation rather than fear. As their final week progressed, the research team's reputation began spreading throughout the scientific community. Dr. Carter received daily requests for preliminary data from their ongoing study, and several universities had already inquired about establishing exchange programs based on their success. "Your methods are causing quite a stir," Dr. Carter told Jake during one of their evening reports to Kepler Station. "The Galactic Research Council wants to know if you would be interested in developing a formal curriculum." Jake looked around at his alien teammates, all of whom had become genuinely close friends over their weeks together. "Only if my colleagues here would be willing to help teach it." This was never about human techniques being superior to alien technology. It was about different approaches working together. Zix's crystal skin shifted to warm golden patterns that Jake had learned indicated deep affection and respect. "We would be honored to work with you on such a project." On their final night in Shadow Stalker territory, something remarkable happened. Instead of the usual cautious probing and testing behavior, the Shadow Stalkers approached their camp openly and calmly. The pack leader walked directly to the edge of Jake's snare perimeter and sat down, making no attempt to trigger the traps or threaten the researchers. "They are saying goodbye," River observed with wonder. Jake slowly approached the pack leader, moving with the calm confidence he had learned from weeks of studying these magnificent creatures. The Shadow Stalker watched him without fear or aggression, its intelligent eyes reflecting the soft light from their equipment. "You taught us as much as we learned about you," Jake said quietly to the creature. The pack leader seemed to understand the tone, if not the words. It stood gracefully and walked back toward the darkness, followed by its pack. They disappeared into the night without triggering a single alarm or trap. "They learned to trust us," Coral said softly, "just as we learned to understand them." The next morning, as they packed their equipment and prepared to return to Kepler Station, the research team reflected on what they had accomplished together. Their data would advance scientific understanding of Shadow Stalker behavior for generations. But more importantly, their collaboration had proven that different species could learn from each other in ways that benefited everyone. "I came here thinking I would teach alien researchers about human survival techniques," Jake said as they loaded the transport vehicle. "Instead, I learned that survival is about more than just staying alive. It is about understanding and respecting the world around you." Sage carefully packed the plant specimens they had collected, many of which would lead to new developments in organic technology. "You taught us that wisdom comes from experience, not just from advanced education." Quinn had compiled water quality data that would influence how future research teams approached aquatic studies on alien worlds. "We learned that simple solutions are often the most elegant ones." As their transport lifted off from the valley floor, Jake looked down at the landscape that had become so familiar over the past month. Somewhere below, the Shadow Stalkers were returning to their normal routines, probably already forgetting about the strange visitors who had briefly shared their territory. But Jake and his teammates would never forget the lessons they had learned from each other. The alien students returned to their home worlds with new appreciation for instinctive knowledge and traditional techniques. Jake returned to Earth with enhanced understanding of how technology could amplify natural human abilities without replacing them. 6 months later, the Galactic Science Academy announced the establishment of its first comparative survival studies program.